Hi, everyone. We'll be getting started at about 12:05 just to give people a chance to hop in. So again, we'll be getting started at around 12:05.
Hey Sal, how's your day going, man?
Good. Yourself?
Not too bad, not too bad. Got me some nice Arby's French fries here that I'm munching on, so
Good lunch to have.
for sure.
Garage door.
All right, y'all. So it seems like we are at about all the folks that we're going to be talking with today. So a couple of housekeeping rules. Feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question. What I will try to do is if you want to type your question into the chat, I'll address your question at the end of each session that we have, at the end of each section that we have. And from that point, I can go ahead and respond to your question. I will try to make some time for us to take all our questions at the end to talk through some of the implications, whatever you would want to talk through. I do believe that we're being recorded today, so if you do not want your face recorded or anything of the sort, please don't show your video, but just be aware that we're recording this session for purposes down the line so that we can share this out to the wider community. And in terms of the presentation that I have on here, I will post it onto it's posted onto the Help Center, and I can send out that link after the fact so that you have a copy of this presentation as needed. Now, just as a quick introduction, I think most of y'all may have already talked with me or have communicated with me in some fashion or another, but my name is Sal Munoz. I am the HMIS lead data analyst, and I started back in November. Previous to this, I was working in another COC, and had been there for about 4 years. So I've been in this field. I've been in the HMIS data management field, and coming into Chip Indy has been great so far. And one thing that we wanted to do this year and impetus for this lunch and learn is really so that we can talk about what the plan is for the upcoming year and to talk through some of the initiatives that we have of cleaning up the administrative processes that we have for the system. So this presentation is going to be talking about a high-level process of both refining our CHIP's own internal processes for maintaining the HMIS system, and also talking through what that will mean for your organizations and the impact that you'll have throughout these changes and throughout these initiatives. So yeah, again, happy to have y'all here. Let's talk through the agenda. So once more, you can see that we are going to be spending a significant amount of time talking about sort of the 4 major areas of improvement that we're looking to implement this year and into next year. So we want to start off by standardizing system administration processes. After that, we'll talk about what it means to set clear expectations and provide guidance in troubleshooting. We also want to improve training and knowledge retention, and really the impact that will have on how you're training new users, how you're training new staff that gets onboarded into your organizations. And then the long-term goal of providing structure for data and change management that your team is able to work through and engage in meaningful ways that make sense for your organization, as we look to standardize more and more of the system, so that we work on a more clear with more clear expectations. And as I had mentioned, everyone feel free to type in questions into the chat. I'll be looking at those, and I will also give you all a link to this presentation separately. Okay, so let's talk about the North Star year and our plan to standardize, consolidate, and clarify HMIS. Now, I think that this year has been a year of significant movement, right? There were a lot of expectations that stemmed from the pandemic response, a lot of funds that are really expanding our continuum at a rapid pace. There's a lot of initiatives that have been occurring within the past year. And so this is a great opportunity for growth. It's a great opportunity for the clients in our system, for being able to respond to people experiencing homelessness and those that are experiencing housing instability. This is an exciting time to be in our continuum as we continue to grow resources and think through how we can better impact the communities that we're working in. But as a result of that, we also have to have a system that's able to scale, that's able to maintain the new users that are coming in, that's able to maintain the reporting requirements that you all have, that's able to support the data needs that you all have of both data entry, training for data entry, and for pulling that data out in response to any reporting to private funders or public funders that you may have. So these are things that we have to keep in mind as we continue to take these resources and really grow them out. And one of the things that in addition to that, is also starting to grow in complexity into the data that we want. If you'll recall, in the mid-teens, the 2010s, HUD was giving very sort of generic guidance on coordinated entry. They were not requiring any explicit data elements. They really left it up to to continuums to determine how they led coordinated entry. Some continuums went with a Google Sheets, some continuums went with solutions that were completely outside of HMIS. And this is all because HUD did not really indicate what the reporting guidance would be. But in years recent, HUD has been much more explicit about what they're expecting from the system and how they're expecting that information. And so we now are seeing HUD grow in their own set of data expectations of the type of data that they receive. And in addition to that, they're also always going to be updating data standards to reflect sort of the needs that we see, right? There are a couple of common sense things like their language around transgender folks, evolving that language. That's a welcome change to data standards, but they also may start to require more minute data as data standards continue to grow forward. An example of that being a prior living situation and current living situation, those two distinctions, in prior to the, I believe it's 2019 or 2020 data standards, we never had to collect current living situation information. Typically, any organization could go off of prior living situation, but now particularly for street outreach and even for some of the coordinated entry folks, they are requiring better data around a client's current living situation rather than just their prior living situation. So just looking at the trends, these are sort of evolutions that we could expect from HUD. And we have to start thinking through how we are going to be able to create a system that is responsive and can expand out to those needs, to those new requirements that HUD will be unveiling. And so this North Star year is our effort to do that. And a lot of that work is internal. It's a reflection on CHIP's own previous practices and improving those practices going forward, so that everyone's sort of on the same playing field. Everyone's on the same playing field. We know the history of the system. We know the requirements of each project in a better sense than how we had been previously documenting that information. So again, this is our goal, and we'll be getting into each section individually. Standardizing system administration processes, creating better expectations and guidance and troubleshooting mechanisms for you all, so that you can work with your own data on a much more effective, in a much more effective manner. And then we also are working to improve our training and knowledge retention and essentially make training standardized across the system, but in ways that are relevant to your agency and to your users. And then the final goal will be to provide you all with tools and methodologies to help you to adapt to system-wide changes and allow you to monitor your own internal processes in meaningful and efficient ways. Because again, HUD data standards typically update every 1 to 2 years. So changes will be occurring by force. They will be occurring because they're mandated by our federal partners, so federal funders. So we want to provide you with the ability to be able to have your team respond to those changes in ways that are not interrupting your flow of work. So let's talk a little bit about standardizing our system administration processes. I don't know if y'all are aware, but for years, the CHIP Indy has been using a vendor called AtWorks. And AtWorks was a third party, I would call them a consulting firm that helped to build out different assessments, helped to build out any implementations in our system. So if you ever in the past had previously, if you were part of a work group that was designing a workflow for coordinated entry or for anything of that sort, we would have a conversation and then take the notes, take the requirements, and then move that over to AtWorks, which was this third-party provider, and they would then handle the changes that had to occur in client track. Now, that's an effective model. That can be an effective model, but the issue that arises from that is that we then didn't have in the system, we don't have the institutional knowledge as a part of CHIP Indy to know the changes that might have occurred. And we didn't have a set of explanation as to what the decisions were made, when and why those decisions were made in the system. And I'm talking purely technical, right? So there may be questions or grants associated with certain workflows, and it was never really properly documented as to why those workflows were done, because we would move from, what the work group and CHIP Indy had decided, then sending it over to a third party. There a little bit gets lost in translation, right? There's a little bit of a game of telephone, because CHIP Indy was not the ones directly making the changes in the system. We were requesting those changes to occur, and then we would review it, approve it, give feedback, but then that also increases the time frame for when an assessment is able to go live. So that was an immediate thing that we needed to correct, and a major part in doing so was for our team to begin to document a lot more effectively. So how are we doing that? Now, we are currently in the process of standardizing forms for project organization and inventory creation and updates. So some of y'all that have already that have had new projects that you needed to set up in HMIS, you might have already seen that I requested you to submit a form through certain, I think it's a form stack, so that we can set up your project in the system. Before, the process was very much an emailing-led process where you would email us, hey, I need a new project set up. And then the individual chip employee would set up your project according to what they knew your project needed. And that's quick, right? That's a nice thing to have that relationship and to have that familiarity. But if you have turnover, if we need to verify something, that information is not there. And that is something that we needed to address. So we now have forms for project creation, for inventory creation and updates. Those are all things that we have implemented so that we have a consistent record that we can check HMIS against. For some of the projects that were created in the past, if I needed to see how the project was set up, why the project was set up in a certain way, I didn't have information. I'd have to check through Jeremy's emails or any other set of emails in order to verify, this project should be set up as TH or whatever it may be. So the forms are here to standardize, and it may be a little bit more work on both of our ends, but it's work that will remain there and that will be able to serve as a reference going forward. And another major element that we've been working on is bringing workflow and form development in-house. So instead of having to go through AppWorks, our vendor, to create that workflow and those workflows and forms, our own team has trained itself, has gone through an Ecovia training to become the full administrator. So we have full design rights to change forms, to change workflows as appropriate. And that doesn't mean that we're going to change everything in the system. In fact, we're really looking to standardize and sort of pare down the system to the most essential parts and most essential and consistent parts. But it also does allow us to know what decisions are being made, why we're making those decisions. It also allows us to be able to document how we're developing those forms. So that's something that we've been trained on and we're currently implementing. Then some more standardizing system administration processes. We're looking to consolidate grants and services in the system. And right now, some of you that have set up new grants, set up new projects, I might have already told you that we're going to give you services that don't have, for Horizon House, it might have had HH before there, right? A service of like HH-case management, and then there's a HVAF-case management, and et cetera. So we created services per project when in fact we should have just created services and assigned them out to everyone. Because this allows us to be able to better report on services, better understand what grants and services are linked to each other. We really need to deduplicate a lot of the administrative items in the system so that we can have a better system going forward and a clearer system going forward. And then one other thing that we've done is starting to standardize how we're calculating certain items. So this means the development of a data dictionary, which is used to standardize performance calculations and make sure that future metrics are consistent and thoroughly explained. So this doesn't only apply to performance outcomes, but it also applies to any of the dashboards that you see. We're trying to make a more consistent effort to show you how we're getting to certain calculations, to certain outcomes, so that you can then react on a better basis. Because from what we heard, people aren't entirely sure how something may get calculated, what is the through line from a client being enrolled to the outcome of that client. What we want to explain it to you. We want to give you a consistent guide of how we're processing that information so that you have a better sense of what is being, of what you're being measured on. So let me review some of the progress that we've made. Like I had mentioned in the previous slide, our staff now has full administrative and design rights to client track. So we are designing workflows now. We're streamlining workflows. We can react to workflows, to issues we see in the system that much quicker because we don't have to go through a third party. myself and my colleague Gwen Beebe have now been trained in this. So we are, we're the ones designing these and reviewing how our previous vendor had designed some of the workflows that we have. So we're in constant communication with Ecovia, and we're really developing our subject matter expertise in client track. And I'm hopeful to say that I think in the next coming months, as we continue to grow that that administrative knowledge base and our own familiarity with the administrative portion of client track, we will be able to provide better user experiences and make small changes that would make the world for your users and the data that you're collecting. And then a couple of other things. We've implemented a project creation form, like I had previously mentioned. We implemented a project naming convention. Previous to the project naming convention, we would have, 5 different projects that were named ESG RH, and there's no clear way of seeing what organization that's a part of. There's no clear way of seeing from your, from reading that, what is it? Well, obviously ESG RH, you would already know that it's ESG and a rapid rehousing project. But if a project's name, the Helping Hands organization or something of that sort, we wouldn't necessarily be able to intuit what type of project it was. So we made all that information that much more explicit. If you've seen in the system your projects that you've enrolled clients into, now it has a naming convention of the org identifier dash the project name, whatever the project name is, dash the project type, and then finally ending with a funding type. So that is what we developed, so that it's easier for administrators so that we know which project you're referring to, but also it's designed to be explicit for any new users you may have, if you have turnover or you're expanding your user set, so that you can tell them, oh, this isn't, they would know if this says ES, this is an emergency shelter project. If this says SH, this is a safe haven project. They would have that better sense of understanding. And it would hopefully reduce the amount of, erroneous enrollments into projects that the client shouldn't be enrolled into. We have a draft of the data dictionary that was provided to COC project managers, and we're currently using this data dictionary to develop our dashboards, to develop the performance outcomes. So those are all things that we currently have and are using to standardize the results that we're showing you all. And like I had mentioned, any new projects that are getting set up in the system are now undergoing the latest protocol for grant and project setup. So one thing to note is that in the system, previously, if you requested a project to be set up, you would send an email, we would create the project, then we would create a grant specific to your project, and then the services specific to your project. Even if it's an ESG rapid rehousing project, rapid rehousing grant that is supposed to be funding 5 different rapid rehousing providers, each one would have their own individual. And that is not a great way to scale a system. That is not a great way to create a system that can be reflexive and can grow, because we're tripling our work of creating a grant per project and then services per project, even if those services already exist in the system. So any new projects that get created, they're going to, unless it's a specific privately funded project, then we'll create it explicitly for that unless it's coming from a grant that's privately funded or that any other project is not receiving. If it's a COC type of funding, a COC PSH type funding, then what we are going to do is create a stock grant for that COC funding and apply it to any project that receives that type of COC funding. So if you have a PSH project that's funded through COC funds, you'll get that generic COC grant instead of Project A's COC grant. We're still able to give you the services that you need to be able to provide for that grant. All that will come standardized, but just know that this is more of an internal process that does not have an impact on your ultimate reporting. Now, this is unless you're specifically using specific services for that reporting, then we can have a conversation. But for the most part, this should not have an impact to your APR, to your EHG caper, to your performance outcomes, nothing of that sort. This does not impact you at all. It's more of an administrative effort to ensure that our system is scalable and that our system's processes for administration make sense and can be understood by, I like to always think of turnover, right? If the HMIS team were to leave today, someone coming in should be able to understand why we're doing certain things. And this helps to ensure why we're doing certain things. And it helps to reduce the complexity that we previously had. And so going forward, what we're looking to do is continue that process of creating projects from the latest protocol, for a grant and project setup. And one thing that we're currently that is currently underway is like mass client deduplication. We have some more information on that, but we have about 3,000 records of clients that have the same name, the same date of birth, and the same SSN. So we are in the process of combining all of those records where applicable. And again, that really will help for care coordination and any organizations that have their clients hidden, right? I'm thinking of a organization that serves only people with severe mental illness or an organization that serves minors. We will, even if we merge your client, any involvement with your organization will not appear to outside users, will not appear to outside organizations. So if one of the requirements of my project is that they have to have severe mental illness, and I don't want anyone to know that the client is involved with my organization, because that would mean that they now know my client has severe mental illness, those enrollments, those services you provide are all hidden from whatever final record the client may have, okay? And then one other thing that we're trying to do is explore how to consolidate and reduce the duplicate services in the system. We have about 4,000 services in the system, and I would venture to guess that about 500 of those are unique. And that's a major problem when we're developing new projects, when we're creating new projects. We had been creating services by project. So we're going to explore how to consolidate and reduce these services. But we're also very mindful that could, we're mindful of how that will affect reporting. So we're a little bit more cautious on that. But just know that new projects going forward will fit under the new standardization protocol. But the previous services, previous projects that already have the old methodology of services, we're trying to come up with a solution that will have a minimal impact to reporting and your client cleanup. So another thing that we've been trying to do is assisting agencies with data entry and reporting. Previously we had not. I think we would be cued into conversations regarding workflow development and expectations at sort of inopportune times. And this time, what we're trying to do, and the practice going forward, is to be cued into workflow development right at the start, to really say what we can and cannot do in the system, so that we have a better understanding so that we set better expectations for the community, for the folks out there, so that you're not entering data and coming up with your own internal workflows because there's a lack of guidance from our end. But I will say, we don't want to tell you exactly how to do everything, right? If you have a certain protocol for case notes, for documenting services, we want to give you that flexibility to do so. What our role will be is to sort of interpret HUD guidance, HUD data standards, and and develop workflows that meet all of those expectations, so that no matter what federal reporting you have to do, you'll meet those expectations. And then from there on, you can build on top of build on top of that to meet whatever case notes or case management needs you need to meet with your own team. So we want to build that baseline. We want to let you know what the baseline expectations are so that you can be able to successfully submit and successfully report, but also allow you the flexibility to kind of build however you need, to collect whatever data you need, because on the front lines it's different, right? And we just want to tell you what we need, what you need to be able to report out for yourself, and then make the system work for you. So the way that we're doing that is that we're further developing the help center. Some of y'all that I might have trained recently have seen the help center. And one thing to note is that we have been initially holding off on updating the help center because we were waiting for an upgrade to a new version of Client Track. But the vendor has not been responsive and has not given us a clear timeline for that new project. So we are going to be building out the help center significantly more in the next coming weeks and months as we start to up how centralized HMIS is to the system. And then in terms of internal activities, we're starting to cross-train a lot more. No one person in the HMIS team has a single role. We are trying to get each of ourselves comfortable with tackling troubleshooting issues, tackling data issues, etc. So again, like I had mentioned, we're in the process of adding articles to the Help Center. Our team has been taking different help desk tickets and trying to provide a wider pool of support from more than just one person. Before, Jeremy's entire role was sort of just that he was essentially the help desk, and that's great. But if Jeremy's out, if Jeremy's no longer here, Jeremy takes that internal knowledge, and no one else has that internal knowledge. So we want to try to avoid that at all possible. We're also using System News to disseminate information. So if you haven't logged into Client Track recently, if you log into Client Track, you will automatically be taken to the homepage, and you'll see the announcements that we have to let you and your users know what is occurring in the system. And like I had mentioned, our team is taking more of an active role in creating workflows and creating reporting and in hearing what the needs of the system are, so that we play an active role in sort of setting expectations of what is required, what is not required, and what is possible or not possible. And another major component of this is training. So some of you, the previous process for training had been to email or rather submit a form indicating that you needed training. Then you would tell us what elements you needed training on, and we would train just to what specifically you had indicated. So there was really no introduction to the general context of the COC, to the general understanding of what literal homelessness, of chronic homelessness was. So we needed to improve training and overhaul training in terms of how we were doing it. And so what our aims currently are to develop a consistent curriculum based on project type, develop a online training process for users so that they can train at their own pace, but also so that they can see information that's relevant to them, implement training feedback surveys, one immediately after the training so that we know what we need to fix in terms of our training protocol and process, but then also 3 months after the fact to see what essentially was retained. And then we want to develop a power user curriculum that highlights reporting and data analysis. So we'll talk about this a little later on, but we want to have a set of users that have a different set of capabilities and abilities than the general HMIS users. And we want to show y'all how to best use Data Explorer and how to navigate the HMIS reports section. So these are some of the things that we're looking to integrate that might be great for the system to have. So what's our progress thus far? Now, we've standardized training. We broke it into two categories. One training is for permanent housing and rapid rehousing, and another training for emergency shelter, safe haven, transitional housing, but also street outreach and supportive services, since they're all relatively close to each other in terms of expectations and data entry needs. Now we have a standardized curriculum at this point where we are now talking about the context of the COC, of coordinated entry. We're defining literal and chronic homelessness, things that we would not touch on unless asked previously. And we are also sort of going to that same methodology that we had done for the projects. We now have a form for new users so that we know what projects they may need access to. One thing that I had encountered in the past as I've been in this community is that there are a lot of projects that are shared amongst each other, right? So you may have a project that's under HVAF, but HIP does some of these social services, so they need access to that project. We would not necessarily know that is required. And so this form is designed to try to get at that, because if we create a user under HIP, they're going to see HIP projects and may not see HVAF projects unless we knew to provide that user access to that particular project. So this will hopefully go towards reducing the amounts of confusion, reducing the amounts of like, I don't see this project. Well, I need access to this project. That's what we're aiming for, instead of setting up a provider, a user in ways that may not necessarily be totally accurate. And so so going forward, we really want one issue that we have been encountering is with our vendor. So our vendor, we had previously been working with our vendor to try to get an upgrade to Client Track 20. And initially they had indicated to us that this upgrade would occur in February. And February turned into March, turned into April. So we are not going to upgrade to Client Track 20. We will continue with our same iteration so that we can start to build out help desk articles and to start to build out training. So that's a little bit of an insight as to why we have not started to develop online training for our system. So this quarter, what we're really looking to do is start the process of developing an online portal that users can log into and take the course themselves, and also sort of do what I call a proctored session where they would create a user account. I'm sorry, not a user account, where they would create a client enrollment and we would review that for accuracy. So we are looking to develop these new methodologies of training that can be paced at the user's level and also verifies that they have some type of knowledge retention from the information that we provide them. And then alongside that training process, we are also going to develop new user training feedback surveys. Like I had mentioned, we have not done that yet because we've been sort of waiting to move forward with the online training protocols. And then further down the line will be a first iteration of a power user curriculum that highlights reporting and data management as a sort of organizational administrator that would be able to pull different reports and have access to different functionality in Client Track that is above that of the average data entry user. So I like to think of this part, the tools and methodologies for data management, as the culmination of all these efforts. Everything is building up towards standardizing the system enough so that you all understand the system that much better and can understand where the system may be going. And this final portion is really there to sort of identify people that can lead their teams in effective ways and use data to inform those processes. Now, I'm not a person who always says like you have to be data driven about everything. I think that the proper way to be is data informed but human centered. There are anecdotal elements that you may have a organization, and you know your user skill level much more than I would know your user skill level. And what we want to try to do is empower organizations so that they can set up ways to start to review data and integrate that more into their week-to-week, day-by-day processes. And so what does that mean? That means that we are looking to identify and start training what we're calling tentatively power users at each provider. And those power users, again, would be given further rights than the typical user, meaning that they'd have access to a couple of query elements, and they'd have access to different specific reporting, and even maybe some case management ability, maybe being able to delete enrollments as necessary so that you can start to integrate some of that troubleshooting in-house. So this is what we want to eventually build towards, so that one, we are better able to communicate with each other between the HMIS team and your team, so that we don't have what sometimes happens where, like, I'll email someone at the organization, but I should have emailed this person. But then I email that person and it may be too late, or the other person might have taken care of it. If we have consistent people that can, delegate within their own agency, the communication would improve that much better and cause for a lot less confusion. And it sort of already worked that y'all have been doing. It's just sort of putting it to paper, putting it to writing. Then we want to develop recommended practices for documentation. So those recommended practices will come with we'll build off of all the articles that we're developing, the knowledge base for you to be able to use. And sometime in Q4, we want to create specialized workshops so that we can bring everyone together as a group and really think through how does data management and how does data management come into play in your week to week, your day by day? How can you use it to really impact your load and your employees' practical workload? How can we reduce it? How can we use it for efficiency's sake? So that's something that we're looking to develop in Q4 and start piloting and improving as we go forward. And then, a long-term goal will be to encourage peer sharing between agencies for data and change management practices. And again, everyone sort of already does that. I think that Indianapolis is really great at sharing information and sharing successes. And though that peer sharing will really help, think of it as a more, again, an official spot to be able to do it, helping to encourage that sharing, not just in sole instances, but how can we integrate it in a more consistent fashion to share lessons learned. So the timeline for the North Star year is at the end of this year. We are looking to consolidate and standardize a lot of the workflows and processes and grants and services by the end of Q3. And from there, we want to start the process of doing sort of the larger, almost cultural data management training in Q4 going into 2022. So what are some of the challenges that we've had? Well, one is that our staff is still developing institutional knowledge of HMIS and also navigating and sort of playing detective in terms of data practices in the past. One challenge is that Indianapolis can at times doesn't centralize a lot of information into HMIS, or doesn't have a centralized point where we can pull information. And that causes difficulty, right? That causes us to lose sight of a couple of things if we don't know that it's already there. So we're building that knowledge, we're building the expertise in client track, we're building the expertise in just knowing the landscape of our continuum and the landscape of the data of our continuum. Because Chelsea and the rest of the team, Rachel, Danielle, they know a ton of our system, but there's still the implementation of how that was done in HMIS that they may not be as aware of how that had happened. And that plays a major part in terms of, why was this project set up this way? Well, I don't know. They may be able to tell me all the conversations that led to the funding, that led to the approach and prioritization and the eligibility of that project. But if we're asking, why is this organization shared with that why is this project shared with two different organizations, we don't necessarily have that written in everywhere. So it's a process of playing detective and a process of continuing to grow our own knowledge of the system. And then one other thing is that the vendor turnaround can be slower at times. Now that we have design rights, now that we are able to edit workflows, we're able to more proactively work with our vendor and provide them better insight in terms of what we're trying to achieve. So that has been improving, but things like the upgrade to Client Track 20, they weren't able to give us consistent timeframes on that. So that is what pushes back a lot of these elements. But again, we're improving on that now that we have full designer and admin rights. And then one other thing that would cause a challenge is these system changes are too severe to move forward, right? When we eventually look into consolidating services, we find that there's going to be, a gigantic impact to your ESG capers or your APRs, or we notice that explicit services have been used as a driver for certain workflows. We don't want to change that. We don't want to alter your data or affect your reporting in that regard. So we are very cautious about that, and we do testing, and we're starting the process of testing through to see what a consolidation of systems will look, of services and grants will look like, and how it may impact certain elements of reporting, visibility, et cetera. So I want to go over performance outcomes. I'm going to talk more explicitly about this on May 19th, but I wanted to open it up to questions in regards to the new year, because I know we have about 10 minutes left. Okay. So folks, if there are none, I'm going to just go through this section. And if you have questions, type them in. I'll try to wrap this up by 12:55 so that we have a couple of minutes to address anything that you may be wondering about. So I want to talk quickly about performance outcomes. So as you all are familiar, the performance outcomes is when we send you a Excel spreadsheet that shows you the score of how you ranked on the NOFA, particularly if you're a COC-funded PSH or rapid rehousing project. And then for providers that are not funded by the COC, PSH, and RRH funds, you will see your performance outcomes as projected, but it doesn't feed into anything. It doesn't affect your grant or renewal, anything of that sort. But the performance outcome process is designed as an opportunity to have you understand where you're meeting your marks or where you're meeting your benchmarks, in addition to helping you understand where you're going to fall in the competition when it opens up. So I want to talk through some of the changes that will be occurring, and we're going to talk more explicitly about this on May 19th during a data dive lab. But we are going to be, instead of the old process where we would send you a file, we will have these performance outcomes calculations directly in HMIS. So you will be able to go to a section in HMIS and see how you're doing on housing stability, returns to homelessness, et cetera. We are working through drawdown cost effectiveness to see how we can integrate that into HMIS right now. And we are, there are some challenges there that we're currently working through and trying to think through. But just in terms of data, this means that your information, if you ever want to see how your performance outcomes are rolling out, or if you want to see what your performance outcomes would be for Q1, you would be able to dictate that time frame and see what your score is. And it's okay. So it seems like I totally dropped out. Can you all hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right. Thank you so much. I apologize about that, folks. Let me get back into it. That was unfortunate. All right. So sharing my screen again. So we don't have enough time to really talk through and ask questions about the performance outcomes. But one thing that I wanted y'all to know is that on May 19th, we're going to have a data dive lab where we will give demonstration of this new tool. We will talk through the current data quality report that we've developed also. And it'll sort of be a kickoff to the NOFA competition, to the evaluation. And it'll be an introduction of how to run it, how to interpret that information, and how to use the data quality report that we recently developed in order to be able to input that, in order to be able to address some of the missing data that you may have, or maybe you forgot to, maybe one of your users didn't add a disability, a barrier or disability when they indicated yes, and that's what's keeping your client from not being considered harder to score. So these are some of the things that we'll be talking through in terms of how you can use new tools that we're developing for your own agency. And then we will have, we'll sort of have 2 points of when data is updated. So all this information will always be in HMIS, and it will be the latest information that you have available in HMIS. But for those that are not HMIS users, we're going to update the performance outcomes on June 1st, and we'll send you the link to where that would live. And then finally on June 14th, and whatever your score is on June 14th would be what's considered for the NOFA ranking. And one thing I want to mention is that in previous conversations, we were discussing about, having maybe the review for Q1, but considering that the NOFA evaluation is so close, then it would immediately be followed by a Q2 review, performance outcome review. We felt that it was a lot some of these elements, it would be a lot to do. So we decided to call off Q1, the Q1 performance outcomes report, and just use that energy and effort for the evaluation that would be occurring. Now, agencies will still be able to check their Q1. The flexibility that these new tools will allows you to still review that. So May 19th, we're going to have more information. Feel free to register for that, and we will use that time to address any questions you may have about the process then. So moving on from there, here's our information, the HMIS help desk, my contact info. I know we don't have much more time left, unfortunately, and I apologize for that hiccup with the hiccup in terms of the breaking in my internet. But if you have any questions, please feel free to shoot us an email at support@ndhmis.mojohelpdesk.com. It's a long email, I admit that. And our team will try to get to you as quickly as we can. And I also want to mention that, again, the Data Dive Lab will really be an important one to attend because we're trying to unveil new processes, new protocols, new tools that you can use. And we want you to participate and have your staff participate as much as they can. So thank you very much, folks. I think that brings us to our time. Unfortunately, I don't have much time to address any further questions, and I haven't seen any questions come in. But if you ruminate on this and you end up with a question, feel free to email us and we'll try to get back to you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.